like here.
That is on me. This
Oh,
is
good.
Monday, June 23rd, coming in hot. As Sasha was just saying, I was joining and hitting play. So what we like to do is let everybody come over from the waiting room as we were just in the waiting room. And you are on Now Next Later for Monday, June 23rd. Sasha, it's great to see you. Jake Vermillion, thank you for joining us.
Oh, great
I'm
to be
excited.
here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation. Sasha, how are you today?
I am great. I feel like I always say I'm doing well. So I'm going to make it a test to see how many new ways of saying I'm doing great I can do. And this week it's great because I go on vacation on Wednesday.
That is great news. Well,
Yes.
we've been talking a lot on Now Next Later about collaboration and working together. And I've noticed, I don't know if it's a recent trend, maybe LinkedIn was always this way, but it feels a lot like there's more celebration and collaboration on LinkedIn. And you were a Monday Maverick, a Monday Mortgage Maverick, which I think everyone loves alliteration. So we can celebrate that today too, because I liked it and shared it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, she caught me off guard with that one. She doesn't, I don't know if she does this all the time. She doesn't give you a heads up that you've been chosen. You just find out. So I was not
That was
aware.
my experience. Yep, that was my
Yeah.
experience. So, but congrats.
Thank you. Likewise. And it's nice to see you again so soon.
Same. Yeah, we got to spend a little time together, all of us in Colorado. So that was fun at the gathering. Now we get to
Right.
just do it again here on Zoom.
Well, maybe
Exactly.
that's a good place to start, Jake, which is you and I had a conversation there about how we should be thinking about uh, introducing concepts at the moment that the consumer comes into the pipeline, at the moment our sales staff is working together. And so today's theme and our topic for today is a lot about how do we think about the introduction of that moment with the MLO, with our loan officers, with our sales staff, but then also how do we think about training and tech tools and support for the next generation of sales that also incorporates kind of the full mortgage life cycle from underwriting, processing, closing, loan delivery, servicing, and then recapture retention. You know, on this show, we pick out certain moments and kind of try to talk about how they fit overall, particularly from a tech perspective. You and I were having almost that exact conversation, but in terms of the sales folks, in terms of what we're delivering and how we're delivering
Yeah.
it, and what that means for
hmm
operations, what that means for capital markets. So maybe you could just start and give our audience a sense of like where you fit in there and how you're talking to sales that, you know, we're going to expand on and dig into today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, it's great to be on Now Next Letter. Many people in the comments are going to know that I'm often here on Mondays, just listening to the experts that you bring on, participating in the conversation. So it's fun to be up here and talking about what we do at Mortgage Champions. So for those who don't know, my name is Jake. I'm the CMO at Mortgage Champions. We have been training lenders predominantly with the sales teams, but we actually take an enterprise level approach, right? So we are often working with operations teams. We're always working with the executive leadership. We're always influencing the management. So we really do have a holistic understanding of how organizations are running and really how they need to come into alignment across their divisions, across their teams, to really be able to win in today's market. So as far as like that first touch point that you're talking about and some of the conversation that we kind of were having in Colorado, I think the key thing that is probably unique about today's market and where lenders really need to get strategic. It's just reflecting on the fact that, well, I mean, first and foremost, it's a first-time home buyers market, right? It's a purchase market. There's certainly refi opportunities. We can talk about how we're seeing our clients exploit those today. But, you know, you think about the fact that the average age of the first-time home buyer is extended to 38 years, right? And you know that that purchasing process has become a lengthy process. So we're all talking about how do we capture attention? How do we nurture customers? How do we get them home ready, right? What you often then see is even the lenders who are doing that well and they're nurturing this customer, they're giving them tools to be able to play with to assess whether or not they're ready. They're clarifying the milestones. They're helping them save for down payment. They're helping maybe address their credit. They finally get to the point where they feel like they're ready. Like these people are in it. Like they've been doing research, they've been taking active steps, and then they finally get connected with the loan officer. And what does that touch point often look like? It's like, hey, this is my name. I work for this company. I'm just confirming some details about your request. Here's a link to a digital application, right? Like there's no recognition that that customer is ready to have a detailed conversation about what it is that they're trying to achieve in terms of home ownership and to get some quality advice up front about what are the next steps? What's the process going to look like? How close are they? You know what I mean? Like, what can they be doing now to like strengthen their opportunity to buy a home? Because we all know inventory is still tight. Like, you got to be ready to be able to snap on that house when you finally find it. So that's the major disconnect, and that's where we're really focusing with the clients that we're working with is how do we continue the conversation you've already started with that customer with the ecosystem that you've built to prepare them from homeownership, and then take it to the next level with guided advice. So hopefully that kind of sums up what we talked about in Colorado.
Jake, what does success look like in those scenarios? Because I hear a lot of chat, both with LOs, but also just leaders that work with LOs around whether or not they have the appetite, the skill set, the desire to like really go into that more, call it financial advisor,
Yeah.
role, right? When you think about what's worked well, is that where it goes? And what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's loan officers acting as advisors, not just as product specialists, in essence, right? Um, a really simple metric that might be surprising to some of the people listening today, but that we found is actually highly corollary to what really produces a closed loan, funded loan, is time spent on the phone. As
Mhm.
we see our clients, if we see average calls, especially for that first touch point with the customer, go from, I mean, it's not uncommon to see 3, 5, 6 minutes, sometimes fewer than like 2 minutes. I mean, to be honest, those are the worst case scenarios, but we do see it. But when you start to see that extend to 15, 20, 25 minutes, there's a direct connection with how likely that customer is to continue through the process and ultimately fund. So that's a simple way to look at it. I think a lot of loan officers, they probably get a little nervous thinking that they have to be the world's best loan officer. They have to know every product, every guideline, you know what I mean? Like know every single thing about a local market. Obviously, it helps to be an expert. We want loan officers to be an expert. Thankfully, there are more tools to help them, at least seem like an expert in front of a customer. But the reality is, if you're willing to just spend time with that customer, answer questions, say, hey, look, I don't know, but I will get you an answer on that, right? And then just continue that conversation, build relationship, and still trust. Make it clear that you're in them with this, and you're going to guide them through the process. Like that's really where you win that customer over.
And one of the themes that it seems to keep coming up that you're getting at is we have to empower experts. And can you talk a little bit? So if the data is telling me time on the phone is a critical metric to get funded,
Yep.
and I know this, but I also need to manage efficiency, and I
Hmm.
can't have my most expensive resource hanging out on the phone either. And so it's
Yep.
always a balance. Like Sasha and I talk about this all the time. It's all about calibrating. That's what really the mortgage business is calibrating time efficiency and resources. Can you talk a little bit about the balance in that between tools, solutions, and the expertise and personal side that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is this is where we get really excited about the potential of emergent technologies like artificial intelligence, for example, right? Um, to date, predictive analytics, they're fine. I would say they're probably not great. I wouldn't say that we're really all that good as an industry at scoring true customer intent, but I think we're going to get much better as these technologies get better and as lenders get access to more data. And you see even large vendors who've created ecosystems now, like ICE, they're integrating data from both the origination as well as the servicing side. Like all of that is going to result in better models to understand when a customer truly is looking to move forward. Okay, so if we can get to that point, then that allows you to be able to deploy your loan officers with high intent customers, and you don't have to worry as much about that cost efficiency equation. But for the typical loan officer, I mean, to be completely honest right now, like look at the volume that's predicted for our industry for this year. Like, what are you being efficient to get to next? You've got a live customer on the phone
Right.
who's expressing interest in home ownership. You'd be like, what are you rushing to get to next? There's really, in our opinion, there's no better, use of time for that loan officer in most situations than to just stay on the phone and build some relationship with that customer. Now, of course, strategically, like we have playbooks that we teach our clients on what to do on that call. One of the first steps, obviously, is going to be, understanding that customer situation. I mean, begin to do some pre-qualification, but you have to do that within the context of relationship, right? You'd be amazed, when we listen to calls and we listen and score all of our clients' calls for them to be able to give them targeted insights into how each loan officer is performing and where we can be influencing performance. You would be shocked by how many times we hear loan officers, they just kind of treat their customers like, the doctor that has no bedside manner, where it's like, all right, go ahead and, let's just dive into it. What's your credit score? What's your income? Can you prove it? You know what I mean? Like, it's just all the nitty gritty things. Of course, we can find a way to ask them open-ended questions to understand a customer's goals, where they're coming from, their timelines, their preparedness, and we can suss out for ourselves how ready this customer is without sort of making it so transactional, and actually set that customer up to then go into whatever system it is we need to put them into for credit repair or counseling, down payment savings, you name it, to get more ready if they're not at the point where they're really ready to move forward. Does that make sense? So you don't have to burn a customer just because they're not ready, and you also don't have to spend 35 minutes on the phone with them. There's that happy medium where you can spend 10 to 15 minutes, build some relationship, keep them in your ecosystem, and then equip them with tools to be able to come back when they're actually ready.
Yeah, I think that makes tons of sense. I think you've hit on one of the critical things for the next 6 to 12 months. So if I had to award a word for the word of 2025 so far for the first half, we're about halfway through, maybe a day, plus or minus a day, halfway through here. It was probably recapture or retention, interchangeably.
Agreed.
Recapture, retention was the word of the year so far. I think it's going to shift. And I think what you just said, propensity, is going to be the word of the second half of the year. And Sasha and I will be available later this year. So keep watching Now Next Later. Look for us at MBA Annual. Sometime between MBA Annual and the end of the year, I think you'll see exactly what Jake's talking about. So I think you are spot on. How do we actually know where to deliver which tool or solution for both our people, our sales folks, and the customer, where they are in that sort of that propensity model that we're all running towards. So I think that's an absolute, I think you're spot on.
And Jeremy, can I add one caution on that front?
Please.
I think propensity on the customer side is going to become incredibly important. It just allows you to take your highest performers in terms of loan officers and just turn them onto your customers and allow them to do what they do best, right? But what we've seen some people do is they've tried to take propensity models and apply them to a first call, for example, with a customer, and just assess which of these are most likely to turn into a funded loan. And all that does is it puts blinders on both the loan officer and the managers over those loan officers to only focus on what they think is going to close and to ignore other opportunities that they just frankly did not make a good approach on. Does that make sense? And it also then perpetuates bad behaviors because you're never really taking time to dig into the bad calls and ask the question of, well, maybe this customer was ready. Maybe this customer was qualified. We just, for whatever reason, didn't capture that. You know what I mean? Didn't treat this with the respect that it and the value that was due. And you never go back and you learn from those lost opportunities, if that makes sense. So I completely agree. Propensity is going to be important, but lenders do, I think, need to be very careful about how they think about using propensity to improve performance and production over time.
Yeah, very well said.
That's a great point. And it hits on, I mean, Jeremy, we've had this topic so much around, AI in particular, but technology at large. Like, when and how do you use it to enable and empower rather than to displace, right? It's more of an augment, right? Use it to enhance. And I keep hearing you say the theme of the relationship, the human factor, that's never going to shift, right? And knock on wood, I don't have any wood near me. I've got granite.
I got some.
I really actually hope that AI does not replace human emotions ever. That's, I'm sure, a possibility and a probability, but it scares me. But for now, in the world that we live in, it's not possible. And that's why we do need that human connection. And so I love what you're saying, because it doubles down on that. Hey, lean in, lean forward with the relationship, what you do best, why you're in this role to begin with. And then on the, maybe second, third step, start to think about how do you balance that out with the right tools, the right technology, to help you think about what's next to move them along that journey.
Yeah. And Sasha, I couldn't.
Go ahead.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with that, but I would also say it's what borrowers are telling us what they want. So it's not just we're saying, well, relationship is important because we're salespeople and that's what salespeople have always been about. You know what I mean? It's important because next gen borrowers who are being surveyed by the likes of Chris Messerly and First IQ, they're saying this is what they want. They want a guided advisor who can come in after they've had time to play with tools and assess their readiness. You know what I mean? And they kind of know that they're ready to take this next step and begin this journey. They want a guide who's going to walk them through that process. So yeah, I couldn't agree more, but I would just add this is what borrowers say that they want. So let's give it to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Listen to them and meet them where they're at. With that in mind, when you think about not just what you're seeing, but also, to your point, what you hear from people like Kristen that are surveying customers, buyers right now, What does that mixture look like typically? Like, is it a, human forward interaction, but a digital buying experience? Like, what is that? What are you seeing that mixture look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, on the purchase side, for example, right? A lot of that preparation that begins up front, right, sort of the dreaming stage, if you will, is going to be a lot of that digital interface. It's when they get serious and they really actually find that home, that's when customers, from what we're seeing from the data, want to be instantly connected with a trusted advisor who's going to move as quickly as possible to execute on getting them into the house, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Where there's maybe not as much data, but where we're kind of bullish still on human connection is then obviously not just getting them through the process. Like we hate it when loan officers kind of check out after the point of application or locking the rate or wherever it is. There's various drop offs, depending on which organization you're talking about. But post close, we really are bullish on loan officers just continuing to proactively pick up the phone. And again, some of that is because of what we talked about earlier. Models are getting better at being able to score when someone may be ready for a cash out refinance or to buy up or buy down or whatever that looks like, some sort of life change driven transaction in mortgage. But nothing still replaces a loan officer just picking up the phone and calling someone every 6 months and just checking in and asking, hey, we set this home ownership plan. I just want to make sure, obviously things have changed in the market. I want to know if anything has changed in your life to make sure that we're still tracking with that plan. You will elucidate information from a customer that you just wouldn't get otherwise from clicks or tracking behavior online or buying third-party data. We're just not there yet, So, so yeah, that's where we're seeing that blended experience happening, if that makes sense.
It does. And I love that ownership plan concept because you're setting the expectation up front that we're going to have a relationship that's ongoing, right? And so it's less awkward when you're like, well, do I pick up the phone? Should I pick up the phone? When do I pick up the phone, right? Do I have to wait for the birthday or the anniversary, or I know the kid's going to potentially win the karate tournament or whatever, right? You have that plan that says, hey, we know we're going to do check-ins, and you're keeping, to Jeremy's earlier point, that recapture in the back of your mind and everything you do, which also goes hand in hand with the maintaining the relationship and really care and feed into the human factor with everything you do.
Couldn't agree more. And as much as I love platforms that are allowing homeowners to, for example, like track their equity and be able to like mock up what it would look like to refinance and all those things, loan officers still, generally speaking, haven't figured out how to make a not weird approach to a customer to be like, hey, you clicked on a link in an email and I know about it and now I'm calling you, So, so if you're proactive all throughout, it also makes it a lot less awkward when you do finally get some intel on that customer, like, hey, maybe they actually are really serious about, buying a bigger house or whatever it is. So.
It's a great call out too. And Jeremy, I feel bad I'm taking over and giving you no space here. But think about it. I mean, when someone does a cash out, typically speaking, it's something very personal. And so it's awkward to even send an email to start that conversation to begin with. So if you have that plan in place, you're going to interact and engage, then it'll come up in a more organic manner rather than being like, I'm stalking you and I know that you need money, right? Like, that's just awkward.
That's right. It also gives you opportunities to truly just check in for the sake of building relationship. You really can be that loan officer for life because they're living a life and you want to know how it's going. You know what I mean? It's not just every touch point that you have because it's triggered by data. It's entirely transactional in nature. So I think that's important too for maintaining that relationship long term.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, no, this is great, Sasha. You never have to apologize. First of all, it's your show too. And second of all, that means we're hitting on something that's really critically important, right? This is why we do this. And I think one of the things I was trying to think a lot about as we walk into next and later, Jake, you've already mentioned a little bit of we need tools. You have to have tools. That's what
Absolutely.
a modern expert does and has right now. And yet at the same time, we still are nervous, it seems. And I want to hit in on what you just said. We operate with like a subconscious disclaimer about what I'm allowed to know or not know as your MLO. Can you talk a little bit more about this? Because we're seeing big data companies and lead gen companies also evolve as MLOs evolve as well, right? And so you're evolving MLOs, you're pushing the sales structure further. Meanwhile, we're seeing, we know the lending trees of the world don't want to make less money. They want to make more money, as we all do. So they have to push lead gen forward. They have to push digital tools forward. So everybody's getting this all the time. Can you talk me through a little bit of your thinking? Have we seen an organization yet, a sales organization, an IMB, a bank, that actually embraces it and says, hey, if you sign up for this program, or if you continue to log in, we'll monitor you together. I may not always be on the phone with you at each step, but we'll be together in the technology. We'll be together in the data so that when you do call them and say, I see you clicked on our site, it's not weird because you've set the expectations. Are we seeing that happen? What's your projection on where this goes?
It's a great question. I don't know that I've personally come across lenders who have effectively communicated that message of, I'm going to have insight into how you use the platforms that we're going to set you up on. We've seen for a long time, obviously, good lenders, good loan officers promise to the customer at the point of close that, look, hey, I consider you, like, you're not my customer up to this point. Like, this is kind of the beginning of a relationship, if that makes sense. And I consider it my responsibility to always be keeping an eye on the market to make sure that if there are any opportunities to take advantage for you to save money, to take cash out of your home, whatever it is, that I'm going to proactively be calling you about those opportunities, then we can just talk about whether or not now is the right time, right? So we're seeing some of that messaging, and I think that messaging is still effective, but it is a great question of like, and I'd love to hear Sasha's, because she might know of someone who's actually doing this, like proactively messaging that, hey, I'm going to have some insight, and is that working, or do you get some kind of like, is it an immediate like, I want to opt out of whatever you just talked about? I'd be curious.
I haven't actually talked to folks on that side, but I can only imagine. And I kind of want to, because I know there are a lot of companies and people who partner with those companies to figure out how best to blend those tactics in. But I haven't actually had those conversations. So now you're inspiring me to go have them after my vacation. And I'd be curious in the chat, anyone that is using any of those platforms, that help you think about how you engage in that relationship and give you little, reminders of when and how to have a conversation. Are you seeing positive impact through that? Or, is it still a little bit of a bumpy road and you've got some awkward moments you got to work through? But I should reach out to some friends in the industry and find out how it's going. Jeremy, have you had any conversations to that end?
No, actually, I had the opposite, which is the tools are there, the data sources are there, but it seemed like everybody was still trying to not reveal that
Yeah.
was what was happening. And so I have been I guess I am maybe a unique consumer in some ways because I'm so curious about being an early adopter, but I like the idea. Because when I get an email or when I get a Instagram ad, it's obvious to me where it came from. It's because I searched something or because I just bought something. Like, I think consumers are ready. And as we move into next and later, it might be that what we're saying is the consumer is too. We now have a more sophisticated consumer because they grew up in it. They've been marketed to since elementary school, middle school, college, whatever it is. That consumer who has experienced it is now buying a house. That wasn't always the case. And so our core demographic is getting older. We know this by the NAR data. We know this by the MBA data. But as that changes and as we do pull in a generation that like everything's marketed to them, they know, they know what an influencer is. They know what Amazon is. So they're just saying like, yeah, just tell me your marketing to me. I'm cool with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they're
and I'm thinking and I think it was Momentum Builder, not Now Next Later, but Kayla came on and we talked a year ago. And, I think at that time, 80% of her business came from Instagram. And I was like, I don't even know how to fathom like digesting that information. But it's a prime example of, younger generations, first-time home buyers that are interacting mostly in digital platform. And I think even when she's a great relationship builder, but even when she approaches it, she might be leveraging tech forward. She might be using some of those, tricks with the platforms, but her tone and her brand is so authentic that I think she has a way of again, like we've talked about, meet the buyer where they're at. And so they might be okay with and comfortable with you being forward to say, hey, I noticed this, or I saw that you clicked here, but it's because of how she then wraps the story around to make it so personal and connected to show that she cares, that it lands well. And so it's probably, I'm guessing, again, not having talked to her in a little bit, as well as, other lenders and or those that are leveraging the technology platforms that help you think about it this way, matters how you frame it and how you package it, right?
Yeah, and packaging I think is important too because platforms, for example, that are able to serve like the face of the loan officer, the name of the loan officer, anytime that those borrowers are clicking around those home search platforms or equity platforms, whatever it is, right? I think it probably does significantly draw down the awkwardness of then that loan officer reaching out, because it's like, well, you're seeing their face every time you're clicking around. It's maybe assumed or planted in the customer's mind that that loan officer would in fact have some level of information of how you're using the platform. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a great point around. I'll just put it in the chat as our third takeaway. Like, you have to consider your strategy around if you're leading with the MLO identity or you're leading with the brand identity. What flag are you supporting? And I think we've talked a lot about companies being honest with themselves about what type of company they are. That actually goes into your roadmap and goes into your strategy. So I'll pick up on that for a question I've been wanting to ask you. And, I'll let you take it in either direction. But in one direction, I'll call it vertically. You mentioned supporting the MLO, but also supporting their manager and then their manager's manager. We know, especially these sales organizations have multiple tiers of sales leadership, but then you also have to support the MLO and your brand strategy horizontally across operations and capital markets and the rest of the organization. Can you just talk a little bit about how you're advising companies to think about this and what influence what we do with sales will have downstream? We just mentioned it for, lifetime value of the client. We now know what you can do to keep, your MLO in front of the person for a lifetime to keep it from being awkward, obviously. But then what about these other pieces across sales vertically or across the organization from a pipeline perspective?
Yeah, so I think a good jumping off point there is that we very firmly believe that organizations should still be aligned around sales, that it should be the central driver of your strategy, right? And the reason why is because it's the central driver of your reputation, your revenue, and your results, right? If you take sales away, what else are you building around? I mean, there's some counter arguments maybe that we've started to see in our industry of align around the customer, or maybe Rocket is making the argument you should align around technology. But for us, ultimately, it's still that loan officer relationship that is driving the bus in terms of whether or not a lender is succeeding or failing. And so, when we come in and we initially are influencing sales, that actually always starts at the executive management levels, because we firmly believe, we kind of wanted to talk a little bit today about sort of the evolution of training and what's happening in that space in our industry. What we've seen a lot lately is that training in many ways is being supplanted by coaching. And that's not to say that coaching is like, we're all about coaching, but coaching really just provides you with tools for navigating the course that you've already charted. Training sets the course, right? So it's like, we first have to have buy-in from the executive leadership and the management that we're going to have a playbook that we're going to be executing as the sales team. And we need to hold people accountable, not just to results, but to the metrics that lead to those results, right? The behaviors and the activities that actually drive success. So once we come in and we actually get that adoption from the executive management layers, we begin to influence the behaviors at the sales level. What you start to see is amazing conversations with your customers and amazing conversations and proactivity with loan officers and the referral partners if they're in like the retail space, right? And so then, of course, like you said, there are downstream effects or horizontal effects, I think was the way that you put it, across the entire organization. Marketing, if they're marketing a transaction or a product-based message, and then the loan officers are getting to a deeper level with their customers, there's a mismatch there. So you have to bring that into alignment. We worked with one customer in terms of like capital markets. Just by working with the sales team, we saw nearly a 40% decrease in fallout. You want to talk about how that impacts hedging and pricing? Like it's a big difference. And even just focusing on that 60% middle of the sales and not worrying so much about the top 10% and the bottom 10%. What we're able to also see is things like loan officers have higher degrees of confidence. They build more trust with their consumers. Their consumers are more bought into the solutions that they're presenting. What do you see less of? Pricing concessions, right? So it makes the whole organization sort of hum together when you start with sales and then build out from there, in our opinion.
Yeah, I think
Jake, I love that point, and it actually threw me on my heels because I would have thought coaching before training, just because I, expect a loan officer's done this a long enough time that they know what they're doing. However, the way that I think about it now that you just laid it out is companies like yours can help support the training, and to your point with that database, like show, hey, we're going to reduce fallout by 40% and here's why and here's how. And then the regional leaders really then have to be those coaches, right? Because we all know the mindset matters, especially in a market like we're experiencing. But it's not really for another company to come in, because you could come in and do a coaching for a day, but like you need ongoing coaching. And so that's where the manager role really becomes so critical of like, hey, your job is to coach them, allow a company to come in and help provide the groundwork for the training that will get them there, and then you keep them going.
That's right. Yeah. If you know what the playbook is and you know where you're failing to execute it, that is the data that informs what you need to coach to. So start with the playbook is our opinion.
Love it.
This is a great, I mean, this has been a great conversation. I feel like we could go for another hour because of all the implications. We do have to wrap here, but what I'll say is we're always looking for those tactical wins where what we're doing in emerging technology and in pushing this industry forward flow to the bottom line as quickly as possible, because we know how critical that is to adoption and to making our companies, you know, the buy-in work. So this final takeaway has been huge. If you do this right and you are thinking about the tools and solutions for your sales organization, it will flow to better outcomes that you can measure. So if you're not thinking about it that way, it's time. Reach out to Jake, but also let us know if you want more of this content, because I think this is a great topic that we have to think more about so that we can evolve and do it in a way that's sustainable for the bottom line.
And Jeremy gets back to what I said last week on the call, play offense, not defense.
That's right.
Love
Exactly.
that. Love that.
Thank you so much for being here, Jake. Good to see you, Sasha. Next
You too.
week, June 30th.
Oh, Jeremy, you froze. I can't remember who he's interviewing next week because I'm not here. I'm in Maui, but he's interviewing somebody fantastic. Who are you interviewing?
Frank Fiore. Frank Fiore.
Fiore, that's right. Oh
Mass
yeah, that's a
Box.
good one. I'm bummed to
So
miss
LOS and
Enjoy.
pricing engines and change management. Jake Vermillion, thank you again for being here. Everybody
Thanks for having me.
find Jake on
see you again,
LinkedIn and join us again soon. We'll talk to you again soon, Jake.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Josh, have a great vacation. Yep.
Enjoy Maui.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.